Welcome to Reddit Storyline, where sometimes the worst kind of revenge isn't loud, it isn't immediate, and it doesn't even look like revenge at first. Because sometimes, the most satisfying payback comes from slowly exposing someone who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Today's story is about a man who didn't just scam people for money, he manipulated them, built trust over weeks, sometimes months, and made them believe in opportunities that never existed. And when everything finally collapsed, the revenge didn't come from anger, but from something much more dangerous for him, the truth being made public for everyone to see. This story doesn't start with suspicion or anger, it starts with trust, which is exactly why everything that follows feels so much worse. Because when someone earns your trust slowly and carefully, you don't question them the same way you would question a stranger. OP's wife was working as a nurse in an intensive care unit, dealing with patients who had gone through serious surgeries, which meant that she often saw people at their most vulnerable, people who had just faced life-threatening situations and were incredibly grateful just to be alive. One of those patients was a man in his late 50s, someone who had recently survived a major health scare, and after recovering, he naturally developed a kind of connection with the staff, especially with OP's wife, who had taken care of him during that time. At first, everything about him seemed normal, even likable, because he came across as polite, appreciative, and generous in a way that didn't feel forced. And when someone behaves like that after going through something serious, it feels genuine. He introduced himself as someone who worked in electronics imports, explaining that his job gave him access to high-end devices at significantly reduced prices. And while that might sound suspicious in another context, in this situation, it didn't raise any red flags because of who he was and how he presented it. So when he casually mentioned that he could help OP and his wife get a high-quality television for a fraction of the retail price, it didn't feel like a scam, it felt like an opportunity, the kind of thing you get lucky with once in a while. And that's how it started. They agreed, they paid, and everything still felt normal. Then, not long after, he offered another deal, this time for a high-end phone that wasn't even available through local carriers yet, something that made the offer feel even more exclusive, like they were getting access to something most people couldn't. And again, they trusted him. And again, they paid. Now at this point, if this were a simple scam, he probably would have disappeared already. But that's not what this guy did, because his approach was much more calculated, and much more disturbing. Instead of taking the money and leaving, he stayed. He kept talking to them, kept building the relationship, and then introduced something much bigger than discounted electronics, a job opportunity. OP was in a difficult position at the time, because his company was shutting down, which meant he was about to lose his job, and when you're in that kind of situation, you're naturally more open to opportunities, especially ones that seem to come from someone you already trust. So when this man told him that he could help him land a management position at a company, with a salary that was significantly higher than what he had been earning before, it didn't just sound good, it sounded like exactly what he needed. And this is where things start to shift, because instead of quick transactions, everything now became about promises and timelines. They arranged a meeting. OP prepared, got dressed, showed up, ready to take the next step in what he believed was a major opportunity. And then, nothing. Hours passed. No sign of him. Eventually, OP managed to reach him, and that's when the first excuse came, something about being attacked and robbed, something dramatic enough to justify the absence, but also vague enough that it couldn't be easily verified. And because it sounded serious, OP didn't question it too much. He just waited. And that was the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself over and over again. Every time they got close to something real happening, something would go wrong. A robbery, a stolen car, a police situation, an injury. Each excuse slightly different, but all serving the same purpose: delay. And here's what makes this so effective, because none of those excuses were completely unbelievable on their own. And when you're already invested in something, when you've already committed time, money, and hope into it, your brain doesn't want to accept that it might all be fake. So instead of questioning it, you justify it. You tell yourself it's just bad luck. You tell yourself it'll work out. You keep waiting. Weeks turned into months. No job. No products. No progress. But the promises never stopped. And that's what kept them hooked. At some point, OP finally reached a moment where he couldn't ignore the reality anymore, because everything had been delayed so many times that it no longer made sense. And that's when he sent a message that cut straight to the point. "Why are you doing this to us?" And the response he got back wasn't an apology, or even a denial. It was something much worse, because the man basically admitted that he could walk away if he wanted to, that there was nothing they could do to stop him, but if they stayed patient and kept trusting him, they would eventually be rewarded far beyond what they expected. And that's the moment where everything changed. Because it revealed something that had been hidden the entire time. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. About manipulation. About enjoying the process of making people believe something that wasn't real. But as calculated as he was, he made one mistake. He didn't realize that he wasn't the only one he had targeted. Because one day, OP's wife overheard a conversation about another nurse who had been dealing with a very similar situation, involving the same man, the same promises, the same delays. And the difference this time? That nurse's husband was a detective. And once that connection was made, everything started to unravel much faster than the scammer expected. Information was shared. Details were compared. More victims were identified. And suddenly, what had been a series of isolated incidents turned into a clear pattern of behavior. When confronted with actual investigation, the man couldn't maintain the illusion anymore, and eventually, he admitted to everything, including the fact that he had been pretending to suffer from mild cognitive issues to make his stories more believable and to gain sympathy. In the end, he agreed to repay the money, likely because he knew that the evidence against him was strong enough to cause serious legal trouble if things went further. But even though the financial loss was recovered, OP wasn't satisfied, because the real damage wasn't something that could be repaid. It was the time, the missed opportunities, the emotional investment. So instead of letting it end there, he decided to make sure that no one else would go through the same experience. And he did that in a way that was simple, but incredibly effective. He created a blog. Just one page. One story. Detailing everything that had happened. Names included. Facts laid out clearly. And at the end, he added a simple question. "Has this happened to you?" What happened next was something he probably didn't fully expect, because within a very short time, the comments started filling up with other people sharing similar experiences, describing the same tactics, the same lies, the same pattern. And instead of leaving those stories buried in the comments, OP turned each one into its own post, slowly building a collection of testimonies that painted a complete picture of who this man really was. Over time, that blog became something much bigger than just one person's experience. It became a warning, a public record, a place where anyone could see the truth. And because of how search engines work, that truth became impossible to ignore. Because now, whenever someone looked up his name, that blog was right there. At the top. Impossible to miss. He tried to fight it. Tried to take legal action. But failed. Again and again. Because the information was accurate. Documented. Supported. And even years later, the blog is still there, still active, still collecting stories. Because even after everything that happened, the man never truly stopped. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not that he scammed people, but that he enjoyed it enough to keep going.